The wind carried sand across the canyon floor, scratching against Caleb Ward's face as he guided his horse along the narrow ridge. The animal's steps were slow, careful, hooves clinking against the dry rock. Caleb had been riding since dawn. His throat felt raw, his shirt stuck to his back, and the canteen tied to his saddle was almost empty. When he saw the mare limping below, he slowed his horse and stared. She was thin, her coat scratched, reins dragging across the ground. The saddle was torn, like she'd broken free. Caleb's instincts told him something was wrong. He led his horse down the slope, boots sliding on the loose dirt, hand resting on his revolver. He approached the mare slowly, speaking low, steady. "Easy there, girl. Ain't gonna hurt you." The animal's ears flicked back, then forward again. She smelled of sweat and fear. Caleb crouched beside her, checked the saddle. The straps were cut, not worn. Someone had done it in a hurry. He followed the tracks leading away from the horse, footprints, one large and one small, both uneven. His gut tightened. He thought about turning back. Whatever happened here wasn't his concern. But as he looked at the hoof prints disappearing into the canyon's shadow, something in him shifted, a memory of a battlefield, the sound of someone calling for help, and him being too late. He clicked his tongue, mounted again, and followed the trail. The sun dropped lower. The canyon narrowed. The air felt heavy, the silence louder than any noise. Then he saw smoke, thin, gray, drifting from the ruins of an old ranch. He stopped, listened. A faint metallic click reached his ears. He didn't move. A woman stepped out from behind a broken wall, a rifle pointed at his chest. Her hair was loose, dusty, and her hands trembled just enough for him to notice. Behind her, a small boy hid, clutching her skirt with both hands. The boy couldn't have been older than 8. Caleb lifted his hand slightly, keeping his voice calm. "I'm just passin' through, ma'am. Saw your horse down by the canyon. Thought someone might need help." The woman didn't lower the rifle. Her eyes stayed on him, sharp and unsure. "You alone?" she asked. "Always," he said. She hesitated. He could see the fear in her, not wild fear, but the kind that had been sitting too long. The boy peeked from behind her skirt. His cheeks were dirty, his clothes torn. Caleb looked at him, then back to her. "The boy all right?" "Don't come closer," she said quickly. He nodded, stayed put. "Your horse's legs hurt. Won't go far in that shape." Her voice cracked a little. "Then I guess we won't either." Caleb didn't push. He waited. Sometimes waiting told you more than talking. The woman's breathing slowed, the rifle lowering just a few inches. He spoke again, quieter this time. "Name's Caleb Ward. Used to ride with the Union. Now I just go where the work takes me. Don't mean harm." The woman blinked, considering. Then she said, "Evelyn Carter. This is my boy, Tommy." Caleb nodded. "Pleasure, ma'am." Tommy looked up, curiosity mixing with fear. "You got food, mister?" Caleb reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small piece of jerky. "Not much, but it's somethin'." He tossed it gently toward the boy, who caught it awkwardly. Evelyn's eyes softened for a brief second before she hardened them again. She studied him for another long moment. "You can water your horse," she said finally. "Then you keep riding." Caleb looked around, the fallen fence, the half-burned barn, the empty fields. It wasn't hard to guess what had happened here. "You on your own?" he asked. "Been that way since spring," she replied. "Don't need your pity." "Wasn't off errand any," he said simply. He walked his horse toward the small well, untied the canteen, and filled it halfway. Evelyn didn't move, still watching. When he finished, he looked back at her. "That barn of yours could still stand if someone patched the roof. You got nails." She frowned. "Why?" "'Cause a storm's coming tonight. You and the boy could use cover better than that wall." Evelyn hesitated again. He could tell she was measuring him, deciding whether he was trouble or not. Caleb didn't say anything else. He just waited, wiping the sweat from his brow, keeping his distance. Finally, she sighed. "There's a box of nails in the shed. If you're fixin' to do something, do it before dark." Caleb nodded once, walked toward the shed, and began to work. The sound of hammering broke the silence, steady and rhythmic. Evelyn watched from a distance, her rifle still in hand, though the barrel slowly lowered as the minutes passed. Tommy sat by the well, eating jerky, his eyes following every move Caleb made. The sun dipped below the hills, painting the wood in shades of red and gold. Caleb kept working, not saying a word, not asking for thanks. When night came, he built a small fire near the barn, careful not to get too close to the house. Evelyn stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You can leave in the morning," she said. "I planned to," he answered. He adjusted his coat and sat by the fire, his face half lit by the glow. He wasn't sure why he'd stayed. Maybe because she looked like someone still fighting to keep her ground. Maybe because the boy reminded him of another time. Evelyn lingered for a moment longer before closing the door. Inside, she sat with Tommy by the cold hearth. "Mama, is he bad?" the boy asked. She brushed his hair back, her voice quiet. "I don't know yet." Outside, Caleb looked up at the stars, tired but alert. He could still feel the edge in her voice, the fear behind her eyes. But something about it didn't push him away, it kept him there, anchored. He told himself it was just one night. He didn't believe it. The next morning came slow and heavy, like the air before a storm. The sound of boots on wood echoed as Eli pushed open the door of the stable. His horse, patched and bruised from the day before, neighed low. Dust hung in the air, stirred by the faint movement of wind through the cracks in the walls. He moved carefully, one hand brushing the horse's neck, the other holding a worn coffee tin. When he turned, he froze. A woman was standing in the doorway, half hidden by the light behind her. The shape of her long skirt and the faint shine of a revolver at her hip were the first things he noticed. Her hair was dark and tangled, falling over her shoulders. She wasn't from town. Her clothes were simple but not torn, travel-stained from long miles. In her arms, she carried a small boy, maybe 5 or 6, whose face was pressed into her shoulder. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Eli's fingers tightened around the coffee tin. "You lost." His voice came out rough from disuse. The woman's eyes flicked over him, his unshaven face, the scar running along his jaw, the gun belt hanging low on his hips. She hesitated, shifting the boy slightly before answering. "No. Just looking for someone who might help." Eli glanced past her, out into the dusty morning. The street was empty. "You sure you came to the right place?" The woman stepped inside. Her boots made a soft sound on the wooden floor. "You're Eli Harper, aren't you? The man who pulled a horse out of the canyon yesterday." He didn't like hearing his name from a stranger's lips. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Claire," she said quietly. "Claire Maddox. The boy's mine. We've been on the road 3 days." She paused, her voice faltering. "The horse you saved, that was ours. We were attacked on the ridge. I saw what you did. You could have left her there." Eli studied her for a long moment. The woman's face was pale, tired, but steady. Her hands trembled slightly where they held the child. The boy peeked up from her shoulder, wide-eyed, clutching a worn wooden toy. Something about the way he held it, tight, protective, caught Eli off guard. He cleared his throat. "You need food or a doctor?" "Neither," she said. "We just need a place to rest. Somewhere no one will look for us." That made Eli's stomach tighten. Trouble had a way of finding him, even when he wanted peace. He looked at her again, her boots caked in dust, her face streaked with sweat and fear. There was no lie in her eyes, but there was something she wasn't saying. He poured the coffee into a dented tin cup and handed it to her. "You running from someone?" Her fingers brushed his as she took the cup. The contact was brief, but he felt it, the warmth of her hand, the tension beneath it. "You could say that," she murmured. Eli looked away, jaw tightening. He could already hear the echo of his own voice in his head, "Don't get involved." He'd told himself that 100 times before. But something about this woman, the steadiness in her eyes, the fear she tried to hide, made it hard to walk away. The boy tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, can we stay?" Claire crouched beside him, running her fingers through his hair. "Just for a while, sweetheart." Her voice softened, and Eli could see how much she was holding back. Exhaustion, worry, maybe guilt. He rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. There's an empty cabin behind the ridge. Nobody goes there anymore. You can stay till you figure out your next move. She looked up at him, surprised. Why are you helping us? Eli adjusted his gun belt, not meeting her eyes. Just doing what I'd want someone to do if it were me. For a moment, they stood in silence again. The tension between them wasn't just fear anymore. It was something else, quieter, heavier. She nodded once and turned toward the door, but before she stepped out, she stopped. "Thank you," she said softly. Eli watched her walk away, the boy's small hand gripping hers. Dust rose around their boots as they crossed the yard. Something in his chest twisted, that old, familiar pull between reason and instinct. He poured himself another coffee, staring at the door long after they were gone. You should have sent them away, he thought. You know how this ends. But deep down, he already knew he wouldn't. Eli rode out toward the ridge before sunset. The air was dry, the kind that made every breath feel thin. The trail curved through scattered mesquite trees and low brush, the hooves of his horse dull against the packed earth. He wasn't sure why he was going. Part of him told himself it was just to make sure they'd settled in safely. The other part knew that was only half true. When the cabin came into view, he slowed the horse. The place had once belonged to an old trapper. One room, a half-collapsed porch, a smoke-blackened chimney. Faint curls of smoke drifted from the chimney again now. Someone had managed to light a fire. He swung down, tied the reins to a post, and stood there for a moment, listening. The sound of a child laughing came faintly through the open window. He knocked on the door. It opened halfway, and Claire appeared, a rifle in her hands. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, but she didn't lower the gun right away. "You shouldn't come here after dark," she said quietly. Eli kept his tone calm. "Didn't mean to startle you. Just wanted to make sure you two were holding up." She studied him for a moment longer, then stepped aside. "You might as well come in." Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and boiled beans. The small boy sat near the hearth, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, drawing shapes in the dirt floor with a stick. Claire had managed to tidy the place, bedrolls spread out, some food on the table, her saddlebag hung on a peg. Eli leaned his hat against the wall. "You made it livable." "It's something," she said. "Not sure how long it'll hold." Her voice carried a tension he couldn't ignore. He took a slow look around, noticing the rifle leaning by the door, the careful way she'd positioned the bed near the wall. Everything about her setup told him she didn't feel safe yet. He sat down at the table, the wood creaking beneath his weight. "You gonna tell me who's after you?" She didn't answer right away. The fire popped behind her, light catching in her hair. Finally, she said, "We were on our way south. My husband used to run freight, took on the wrong job for the wrong men. When they couldn't find him, they came for me." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "He's dead, Eli. Has been for months. But they don't believe it. They think I know where he hid what he stole." Eli watched her closely. She wasn't lying. He could see that in the way her voice trembled only once, then steadied. "And do you?" Her lips pressed together. "I wish I did. Maybe then I could have bargained with it." The boy stirred at the sound of their voices, glancing up at Eli. "Mama, is he a bad man?" Claire smiled faintly and brushed the boy's hair back. "No, sweetheart. He's just someone who helped us." Eli felt a strange weight in his chest, not guilt, exactly, but a kind of unease. He'd spent years being judged by faces like that, people trying to decide if he was the villain or the one who'd keep them alive another night. He shifted in his seat. "If they're still tracking you, this place won't hold long. They'll ride through this valley sooner or later." Claire looked down at her hands. "Then what do you suggest?" "Tomorrow I'll head into town, see if anyone's asking questions. You stay here, keep that rifle close." She nodded, but there was something else in her expression, not just fear, but weariness. He saw the small tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders sagged once she stopped trying to hold herself together. "Sit," he said quietly, gesturing toward the chair opposite him. "You look like you haven't slept in days." She hesitated, then sat. The firelight cast a faint glow over her face. The skin under her eyes was dark from exhaustion. She kept glancing toward the window, as if expecting someone to appear out of the dark. Eli poured water from his canteen into a tin cup and slid it toward her. "Drink." She took it, their fingers brushing again. This time neither pulled away quickly. He looked at her hand, small, roughened at the knuckles, a faint cut along one finger. He could tell she wasn't used to being on the run. Something in him tightened again, that same instinct that had gotten him into trouble before. Protect, help, get involved. "You don't have to do this," she said suddenly. "You don't owe us anything." He leaned back, arms crossed. "Maybe not. But I've seen what happens when people turn their backs." For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled, and outside, a coyote cried somewhere in the distance. The boy had fallen asleep, curled up by the hearth. Claire's voice softened. "You lost someone once, didn't you?" Eli's eyes flicked to her, but he didn't answer right away. He didn't like talking about the past. It made things too real. "Everyone's lost someone," he said finally. She nodded slowly. "Still, you carry it different." Eli stood, pulling on his hat again. "Get some rest. I'll keep watch outside for a while." When he stepped out, the night was cool and still. The stars stretched wide above the ridge. He leaned against the porch post, listening, to the wind, to the faint sound of the woman moving inside. He knew what he should do, ride out at first light, leave before the trouble reached him. But as he looked toward the dim glow from the cabin window, he felt something shift, a quiet pull he couldn't explain. He stayed there a long time, until the fire inside went dark. Eli woke before sunrise. The air was cold and dry, the kind that burned the lungs a little when you breathed too deep. A faint line of gray light spread across the horizon. He'd fallen asleep sitting against the porch post, rifle resting beside him, hat tipped forward. His back ached when he stood. The desert was silent except for the wind pushing through the brush. He turned toward the cabin. Through the cracks in the shutters, he could see movement, Claire already awake, feeding the fire. She was quiet, careful not to wake the boy. Eli pushed open the door, and the smell of smoke and coffee filled the air. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Neither did you," she replied, without looking up. He poured some coffee from the pot she'd set on the stones near the fire. It was bitter and strong. He took a slow sip, eyes on her. There were dark circles under her eyes, but her hands were steady now. The night had taken something from her, but it had also given her a kind of calm resolve. "I'll ride out after breakfast," he said. "Check the ridge, see if there's been movement." Claire nodded. "Just don't let them see you." "I won't," he said. Then, after a pause, "If they find you, don't wait. Take the boy and head south through the wash. There's a creek bed that'll hide your tracks for a while." She froze, her hand stilling over the pot. "You're talking like you might not come back." "I'm talking like someone who's seen bad things go sideways fast." Her gaze lifted to his, steady and unreadable. "You could have left already. Why stay?" Eli didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself. Maybe it was the kid. Maybe it was the way she kept trying to stay strong when she was clearly breaking. Or maybe he was just tired of walking away from people who didn't deserve to be left behind. He set his cup down, grabbed his rifle, and stepped outside. The sun was just beginning to edge over the ridge, painting everything in dull orange light. The horse snorted softly as he mounted. He rode out slow, staying low through the brush, scanning the valley below. The tracks from the wagon she'd used days before were still visible, faint but clear to someone who knew how to look. He followed them until the land dropped into a wide basin. That's when he saw them. 3 riders, maybe 4, moving through the valley floor. They weren't in a hurry, but their formation was wrong for travelers. They rode spread out, scanning both sides of the trail. One stopped, leaned down, looked at something on the ground. Eli's stomach tightened. They'd found the old trail. He backed his horse up the slope, slow and quiet. Every hoofstep sounded too loud. When he reached the ridge line, he dismounted and crouched low. He could hear their faint voices carried by the wind, rough, confident, men who thought the land belonged to them. He stayed until they passed, then turned back toward the cabin. Halfway there, he stopped. If they kept following the tracks, they'd be within a mile by sundown. Maybe less. He had a choice: take Claire and the boy and run, or stand and fight. Running would be safer, but not if the boy slowed them down. And the ridge gave them cover, at least for a short while. When he reached the cabin, Claire was outside, hanging a blanket to dry. She saw his face and froze. "They're coming, aren't they?" He nodded once. 4 of them. Half a day behind, maybe less. Her hand gripped the cloth tighter. "Then we go now." "Not yet," he said. "If we move now, we'll leave tracks straight to us. Better to wait until they pass the ridge, then circle out behind." She frowned. "And if they don't pass?" "Then I make sure they do." Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. "You'll get yourself killed." He didn't respond. He stepped past her, checked his revolver, and set a box of cartridges on the table. The motion calmed him. Routine always did. He looked around. 1 door, 1 window, no real defense if they got close. The plan was simple: hold them long enough for her and the boy to ride south. Claire followed him inside. "There's got to be another way." "There's always another way," he said quietly, "just not one that works fast enough." She hesitated, then reached out and took his arm. The contact was small, but it stopped him cold. "You don't owe me this, Eli." He looked down at her hand, then at her face, the fear, the fight, the exhaustion. "You don't get to tell me what I owe." The air between them hung heavy, neither moving. Her hand lingered a moment longer, then dropped. He grabbed his hat and stepped outside again. The sun was higher now, heat starting to rise off the dirt. The sound of Tommy's voice came faintly from inside, asking questions, probably wondering why his mother was quiet. Eli saddled his horse, checked his rifle again. His thoughts were steady but sharp. He'd done this before, outnumbered, outgunned, trying to buy time. But this time, it wasn't about orders or pay. This time it was about a woman who didn't deserve another loss. When he looked back at the cabin, she was at the doorway, watching him. Her hair moved slightly in the wind, her face unreadable but tense. He gave a small nod. "Lock the door. Keep him quiet." She nodded back. "Eli." He paused. "Come back." He didn't answer. He couldn't promise something he wasn't sure he could keep. He just turned, mounted up, and rode toward the ridge. The land stretched wide and empty ahead of him, the kind of silence that carried weight. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of the horse. Each step closer to the ridge tightened the air in his chest. Fear was there, but it wasn't panic. It was the kind of steady edge that kept a man alive. When he reached the top, he slid off and crouched behind a boulder. Dust rose faintly in the distance. The riders were closer now. He counted them again. 4. One of them carried a rifle across his saddle, another had a red bandana tied to his arm. Eli raised the rifle and took a breath. He didn't plan to kill unless he had to. He just needed them to turn back. But when the lead rider looked up toward the ridge, straight toward where Eli hid, he knew the time for hoping was over. He braced the rifle, eyes narrowing. The fight was coming. And he wasn't running this time. The first shot cracked through the still morning air. Eli felt it in his chest before his mind caught up. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder, scattering birds into the sky. He ducked behind the rock, dust kicking up around his boots. The sound came again, closer this time. A rifle. He leaned out just long enough to see the riders spreading apart, trying to flank him. He steadied his breathing, pressed his cheek to the worn stock of his rifle, and fired once. The recoil jolted his shoulder, but the lead rider dropped from his horse, tumbling hard into the dirt. The others pulled their reins, shouting to each other, confusion breaking their formation. Eli shifted position, counting the seconds between shots. His pulse slowed the longer it went on, the rhythm of survival he'd learned years ago. Think, move, shoot, breathe. He saw one rider trying to circle left through the brush, another cutting down toward the dry creek bed. He took another shot, missed, cursed quietly, then crawled backward toward a second patch of cover. Bullets struck the rock above him, throwing chips of stone against his face. He could smell gunpowder and hot dust. At the cabin below, Claire heard the gunfire and froze. Her hands went to Tommy immediately, pulling him close. His eyes were wide, but he didn't cry, not yet. She crouched with him near the hearth, trying to keep her voice calm even though her throat was tight. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "Do you hear me?" No sound. He nodded quickly. She could feel his small body trembling against her. Every gunshot outside made her flinch, but she forced herself to stay focused. Running now would expose them. Eli had said to wait. She trusted him, maybe more than she should, but there was no time to question it. She moved to the window, crouched low, and peeked through the gap in the shutter. The ridge was half visible through the morning haze. She saw flashes of movement, horses, a man falling, then nothing. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her palms. Back on the ridge, Eli reloaded fast, sliding cartridges into the chamber with practiced motions. One of the men shouted something, a voice he recognized but couldn't place. He ignored it, focused on the sound of boots crunching closer through the brush. He waited until he saw the man's shadow, then fired again. This time, he didn't miss. The shot hit center, the man falling without a sound. The horse bolted, reins dragging in the dust. Eli ducked again, but not fast enough. A bullet grazed his upper arm, tearing fabric and burning like fire. He bit down a curse and pressed his hand over the wound. The pain sharpened his thoughts. He checked the ridgeline again. 2 left. One of them, the one with the red bandana, dismounted and started up the rocks on foot. The other stayed back, covering him. Eli took a slow breath. If he stayed pinned too long, they'd flank him. He needed to move now. He slid down the backside of the ridge, keeping low, the sound of boots crunching close above him. When the shadow passed over, he swung around, grabbed the man's arm, and slammed him against the rock. The rifle went off wild, grazing the dirt. Eli drew his revolver and fired once, point blank. The man dropped without a word. The echo faded, leaving only wind. Eli crouched there, catching his breath. His arm throbbed, warm blood soaking into his sleeve. He could taste dust and copper on his tongue. The last rider was still out there, too quiet now, maybe repositioning, maybe retreating. He turned toward the ridge, scanning for movement. That's when he saw it, a flash of metal near the tree line below the cabin. He swore under his breath. The last one had slipped around. He ran, half sliding down the slope. His boots hit the dirt hard, sending small rocks tumbling behind him. He could see the cabin now, the door shut tight, smoke curling from the chimney. Claire's figure flickered for a moment through the window. Then, gunfire erupted again. Inside, Claire heard the shot hit the side of the cabin. Splinters flew across the floor. Tommy cried out, clutching her skirt. She pulled him close, whispering, "It's all right, baby, stay down." Her voice shook, but she forced herself to move. She reached for the rifle leaning by the wall, the one Eli had left the night before. Her hands trembled as she checked the chamber. 1 bullet already loaded. She crouched low, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. Outside, Eli came around the side just as the gunman reached the door. The man was reloading, half hidden by the porch post. Eli didn't hesitate. He fired once, the shot hitting wood inches from the man's shoulder. The gunman spun, returned fire, the bullet tearing into the doorframe. "Claire!" Eli shouted. "Stay down." He moved fast, circling left, the pain in his arm sharp but manageable. The gunman fired again, missing by inches. Eli dropped to one knee, took a steady breath, and shot once more. This time, the man went down hard, crashing against the porch rail. For a moment, everything went still. The wind moved through the brush. Then, silence. Eli lowered the gun slowly, watching the man's body slump to the ground. His breathing was ragged, and sweat rolled down the side of his face. He stood there for a long moment, waiting for any other movement. There was none. Claire opened the door a few seconds later, rifle still in her hands. She looked around, then at Eli. Her eyes landed on the blood running down his sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, voice shaking. He glanced at it like he hadn't noticed. "Just a scratch." She didn't believe him. She stepped forward, took his arm, and pulled him inside. Tommy stayed by the wall, clutching his toy, watching with wide eyes as his mother worked. Claire tore a strip from an old cloth and pressed it to Eli's arm. He winced but didn't pull away. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the room. "You shouldn't have stayed out there alone," she said quietly, tying the cloth tight. "I told you to run," he said. "And leave you to die." He looked at her, really looked. Her face was streaked with dirt, hair loose around her shoulders, hands shaking slightly. But her eyes were steady, full of something stronger than fear. "You did good," he said finally, voice low. "Kept him safe." She looked up, their faces close now. Neither moved for a long moment. Her breath came slow and uneven. His eyes dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. "Eli," she whispered, not sure if it was thanks or something else. He stepped back first. "We should bury the bodies before noon. Someone'll come looking." She nodded, still watching him. The tension didn't break, it just hung there, quiet but alive. Outside, the wind picked up again. The danger was over for now, but the silence between them felt heavier than before, not from fear, but from everything they hadn't said yet. And as Eli stepped out to drag the first body toward the ridge, Claire watched from the doorway, one hand pressed against her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. She didn't know if she was afraid of the men who had come for them, or of what she was starting to feel for the one who stayed. The sun had barely started to rise, casting a cold, pale light across the scrubland. The horizon shimmered with heat that hadn't arrived yet, and the smell of dust and ash still clung to the air. Sarah stood at the edge of the porch, one hand resting on the worn wood of the railing, her eyes locked on the silhouette moving along the dirt road that cut through the plain. At first, she thought it was an animal, a coyote maybe, but then the figure straightened, stumbling slightly, a limp clear in the movement. It was a man. Her pulse kicked. Her first thought was to grab the rifle from behind the door. Out here, no one just appeared without reason. Especially not at dawn. But then she saw how he moved, slow, dragging one foot, his body swaying with exhaustion. He wasn't a threat. Not immediately, at least. She stepped down from the porch, the boards creaking under her bare feet. The ground was cold. As she approached, she could see him more clearly, dark coat torn at the shoulder, blood dried along his sleeve, hat tilted low over his face. His boots were covered in dust. Whoever he was, he'd been walking for miles. "Hey," she called out cautiously, her voice steady though her chest tightened. "You need help." The man didn't answer right away. He stopped, lifted his head, and she saw the deep lines around his mouth, the dirt caked into his skin. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse and cracked. "Water," he said. "Please." Sarah hesitated only a second. Every instinct told her to stay careful. But there was something in the way he said it, something raw and tired, like the word itself was the last bit of strength he had. She turned and hurried back to the cabin, grabbed the half-filled canteen from the table, and ran back out. He took it from her with trembling hands, drank too fast, then coughed hard, bending over as he tried to catch his breath. She stepped closer, steadying him by the arm. His skin was hot, too hot. "Fever, maybe." "You hurt bad?" she asked. He nodded, wincing as he shifted his weight. "Bullet grazed me. 2 days back. Didn't stop to stitch it proper." She looked at the wound, half bandaged with a strip of filthy cloth. Infection was already setting in. It wasn't the first time she'd seen something like it. She glanced toward the house. Bringing him inside was a risk. If he was being hunted, anyone looking for him could follow. But leaving him out here wasn't an option either. She remembered the boy sleeping inside, the child she'd taken in months ago. Her throat tightened. If he's dangerous. Still, she couldn't walk away. Not from someone bleeding and half dead in front of her. "Come on," she said finally. "You can sit inside. I'll clean that wound." He looked at her, uncertain. Maybe he could see the hesitation in her eyes. "You sure?" "No," she admitted, turning toward the door. "But I'm doing it anyway." Inside, the cabin was dim, lit only by the fire that had burned low overnight. She motioned for him to sit by the table. The boy stirred in the next room, and Sarah froze, listening. When she heard the small sigh of sleep, she relaxed a little. The man sat, removing his coat with a grunt. The fabric peeled away from the dried blood on his shoulder. Sarah filled a bowl with water and grabbed a clean cloth, her hands shaking slightly as she worked. As she cleaned the wound, he flinched but didn't make a sound. His jaw tightened, eyes focused somewhere distant. "Who shot you?" she asked quietly. "Didn't ask for names," he said. "Didn't stay long enough to find out." She studied him for a moment. There was something deliberate about the way he avoided her gaze, like he'd learned not to trust anyone, not to give away more than he had to. When she finished cleaning the wound, she wrapped it tightly with fresh cloth. "You'll need to rest," she said. He nodded once, eyes heavy. "Thank you, ma'am." "Sarah," she corrected. He looked up at her for the first time, really looking. "Name's Cole." She gave a small nod, then stepped back, trying to read him. The silence stretched. The crackling of the fire was the only sound between them. He seemed decent. But she'd learned before that decent didn't always mean safe. As she stood there, she felt that old ache in her chest again, the same one that came every time she took a chance on someone. The fear that helping could cost her everything. Still, she poured him another cup of water, placed it in front of him, and said quietly, "You can stay until you're strong enough to leave. But no trouble. Understand?" Cole gave a faint, tired smile. "I don't have the strength for trouble." Sarah nodded, though her hand stayed close to the drawer where she kept her revolver. "Just in case." Outside, the wind picked up, blowing grit against the windows. Somewhere far off, a horse cried out. She looked at Cole, then at the door. She couldn't shake the feeling that this morning had changed something. That whatever path she'd been on had just taken a turn, and there was no going back. The morning passed slow. The air inside the cabin was heavy with the smell of boiled coffee and antiseptic. Cole sat by the table, his arm in a fresh bandage, his face pale but more alert than the night before. The fever had broken during the night, though sweat still clung to his skin. Sarah moved quietly, cleaning the dishes, trying not to make noise that would wake the boy. Every so often, she glanced toward Cole. He noticed, but he didn't say anything. His eyes followed her movements, not in suspicion, more in a quiet sort of awareness. The boy, Eli, stirred in the next room. His small footsteps padded across the floor before he appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. When he saw Cole sitting there, he froze. Sarah turned, voice calm. "It's all right, Eli. He's just passing through. Got hurt. We're helping him get better." Eli nodded slowly, still watching the stranger. Cole gave a faint smile, trying not to look intimidating. "Morning, kid," he said softly. Eli said nothing, just stepped back behind Sarah, holding on to the hem of her skirt. Sarah felt his hand gripping the fabric. He hadn't done that in months. Not since they'd settled here. It told her everything. He was uneasy, and she couldn't blame him. Cole looked down at his hands. "Didn't mean to scare him," he said. "You didn't," Sarah replied, though she knew he had a little. "He just doesn't trust easily." Cole nodded, accepting that. His gaze moved to the window. "Can't say I blame him. Not much reason to trust anyone out here." That line hit closer than she liked. Sarah set the mug down and leaned against the counter. "So who's looking for you?" He hesitated. His jaw tightened, then he said, "Men who don't forgive easily. That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No," he said simply. "Just the truth." She studied him. The way he spoke, measured, honest but withholding, made it clear he wasn't some outlaw trying to charm his way in. He was tired. Maybe guilty of something. Maybe not. Either way, he wasn't ready to share more. Eli tugged at her hand. "Is he staying?" he whispered. "For now," she said quietly. Cole heard it but didn't react. He took another sip of coffee, his hand steady now. After breakfast, Sarah stepped outside to gather wood. The sun was already harsh, baking the dirt under her feet. She took longer than she needed to. The air inside had been too tight, the silence too loud. She needed to think. If Cole was running from someone, that could bring trouble here. But if she sent him away now, in his condition, she'd be sending him to die. She couldn't do that. Not again. When she came back, Cole was sitting near the fire, talking quietly to Eli. It surprised her, Eli wasn't usually talkative with strangers. Cole was showing him how to whittle a small piece of wood into shape. "See," he was saying, "you go slow, keep the knife steady, and always cut away from yourself. Don't fight the grain." Eli watched every move carefully, eyes wide, knife trembling in his small hand. Cole corrected his grip gently, patient, like someone who'd done this before. Sarah stood in the doorway, unseen for a moment, watching them. The sight made her chest tighten. It had been a long time since she'd seen Eli so focused on something other than surviving the day. But the thought that followed hit harder. She didn't know who Cole really was. And if danger followed him here, all this, Eli, the house, the fragile sense of peace, could fall apart fast. She cleared her throat. Both of them looked up. "Eli," she said, "time to fetch water from the well." The boy nodded, set the knife down carefully, and went outside. Cole leaned back, watching him go. "Good kid," he said. "Yeah," she answered. "He's been through enough." Cole didn't ask what that meant. He just nodded once, understanding it didn't need to be explained. After a pause, she said, "You can stay one more night. But if someone's tracking you, I need to know now. I have a child here. I won't risk him." Cole met her eyes. "You won't have to," he said. "They won't find me this far out." "You sure of that?" "Sure enough." That wasn't good enough, but she let it go. Not because she trusted him, but because she wanted to. When evening came, she watched him step outside and sit on the porch. He stared out toward the distant hills, silent, as the sky turned red and the wind picked up. There was something in his posture, a weariness that ran deeper than his wound. She wondered what he'd done, what he'd lost, why he looked like someone who'd stopped believing he deserved kindness. Later, when she locked the door and checked the window shutters, she glanced at him one last time. He was still out there, hat pulled low, rifle beside him, as if standing watch. Maybe for himself. Maybe for them. Sarah didn't know yet which it was, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. The morning light came slow, pushing through the cracks in the shutters. Sarah woke before Eli. She listened to the quiet, the kind of quiet that feels wrong after days of waiting for trouble. Her eyes went straight to the porch. Through the window, she saw Cole sitting there, same as he had the night before, hat tipped low, rifle laid across his lap. He hadn't gone to bed. She stepped outside, the floorboards creaking under her bare feet. "You sleep at all?" she asked. Cole didn't look up right away. His voice was low. "Didn't seem smart to." The sound of his voice was calm, but something in it made her stomach tighten. He wasn't just being cautious, he was waiting for something. Sarah folded her arms against the morning chill. "You think someone's close?" He nodded once. "I saw dust out east. Could be riders cutting across the ridge. Could be nothing." She stared out past the barn toward the hills. The light made it hard to see far, but she trusted his eyes more than hers. "You're planning to run." Cole turned to her then. His face was steady, but his eyes gave him away. "If they come this way, I'll lead them off. They want me, not you." "You can't know that," she said. "And I'm not letting you go out there alone." He shook his head. "Sarah, you got a boy to think about. You keep him safe. That's what matters." She stepped closer, voice tightening. "Don't tell me what matters. You think I can just stand here while you ride into gunfire?" He finally looked at her, really looked, and for a moment the edge in his face softened. "You already saved my life once. Don't try to do it again." Before she could argue, Eli's small voice came from the doorway. "What's happening?" Both turned. He stood there, half awake, clutching the doorframe. Sarah forced a calm she didn't feel. "Nothing, sweetheart. Go back inside." But he didn't move. He looked at Cole, then at the rifle, then back at his mother. "They're coming, aren't they?" Cole crouched down so he was eye level with the boy. "Maybe," he said honestly. "But you and your ma, you stay low. You hear shooting, you stay put. No matter what." Eli swallowed hard, his lip trembling, but he nodded. Cole stood and walked toward the barn. Sarah followed, her pulse thudding against her ribs. Inside, he saddled his horse quick and quiet, every movement practiced. The smell of hay and leather filled the air. She stepped close, grabbed his arm. "You don't have to do this." He stopped, met her eyes. "If they find me here, they'll burn this place down. You know that." He was right, and that was the worst part. Her grip tightened. "You'll come back." He hesitated, and in that silence she saw the truth. He didn't know. But he didn't want to tell her that. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'll come back." Before he could pull away, she kissed him. It wasn't careful or planned. It was fast, almost desperate, like she was afraid she'd lose the chance. He froze for half a second, then kissed her back. It wasn't long, but it was enough to make her chest ache. When she pulled away, her hands were shaking. "You better keep that promise," she said. Cole gave a faint nod, then swung up into the saddle. He looked at her one last time, his expression unreadable, then rode out toward the open ridge. The sound of hooves faded into the wind. Sarah stood there, numb, until Eli tugged at her hand. "He's gonna be okay, right?" She forced herself to smile. "He'll be fine." But the words felt thin. Hours passed. The sun climbed high. Then, faintly, the sound of gunfire rolled across the hills, 2 sharp cracks, then silence. Her throat went dry. She grabbed the rifle and ran outside, Eli calling after her. She made it halfway down the field before she saw it, a lone rider coming back slow. Her chest clenched until she saw the coat, the hat, the way he sat straight in the saddle. It was him. When he reached the fence line, she saw blood on his sleeve, dust on his face, but his eyes were clear. He slid off the horse, wincing. "They're gone," he said, voice hoarse. "Won't be coming back." Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Eli ran to him, wrapping his arms around his waist. Cole froze again, then rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, awkward but gentle. "You came back," Eli said. Cole glanced at Sarah. "Told you I would." Sarah stepped closer, her voice quiet. "You're bleeding." He gave a tired smile. "Seems like I make a habit of that." She shook her head, blinking fast, fighting the tears that burned behind her eyes. "Let's get you inside." That night, the 3 of them sat by the fire. The storm outside had started up, wind rattling the shutters. Cole's arm was bandaged again, Eli had fallen asleep against his leg, and Sarah sat across from him, watching the flames flicker against his face. For once, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The silence wasn't tense anymore, it felt steady. "After a long while," Sarah said quietly, "you can stay. Not for a night. For good." Cole looked at her, expression unreadable, then nodded once. "If you're sure." "I am," she said. "We both are." He leaned back in the chair, eyes softening as he glanced at the boy sleeping beside him. For the first time in years, he looked at peace. Outside, the storm moved on. Inside, the fire kept burning, the cabin warm and still. The running was over. And for all of them, it finally felt like home.